Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're getting into something really fascinating. The story that seems to be written deep inside Tamil DNA.
That's right. We've been looking through quite a bit of material, especially this one exploration that uses genetics to look at history and identity in South Asia in a new light.
And our mission really is to unpack what this genetic blueprint might tell us about the deep past, about survival, about identity, using these sources as our guide.
Yeah, think of it as a journey into deep time, using DNA as the map. And it definitely challenges some conventional ideas about how populations moved and mixed.
So where should we start? The core finding seems pretty stark, doesn't it?
It really does. The source material points out that Tamil DNA looks significantly older in some ways and much less affected by those big Indo-European migrations that swept across other parts of the subcontinent.
Right, the source uses this image. While other regions bent beneath wave after wave, the Tamil genome sort of stood like a stone.
It's a powerful metaphor, implying a kind of deep-rootedness, a genetic persistence.
Which is kind of paradoxical when you think about it, because this ancient genetic signature is found in a region known for, its historical caste structures and ideas about purity.
Exactly. Yet the DNA itself seems to carry very few, almost none, of the specific genetic markers linked strongly to those large-scale northern migrations that influenced other areas.
So it suggests this really strong genetic continuity right there at the southern tip that resisted being heavily overwritten.
Precisely. A story of endurance written in the genes.
And we can trace this in different ways. The source talks about the mother's line first, through mitochondrial DNA.
Yes, mtDNA. It's passed purely from mother to child, so it's like following an unbroken thread back through time.
And in Tamil populations, they find specific lineages, M and N.
M and N, that's right. And the key thing is their age. They trace back potentially over 40,000 years.
40,000, that's hard to even grasp. The source calls it memory written in molecules.
It really is. Think about it, this line goes back potentially to the first modern humans who migrated out of Africa and down India's coast.
So this ancestry predates, well, pretty much everything we think of as ancient history. The Mahabharata, Sanskrit, big cities.
Even established language families as we know them today. It's incredibly deep.
And the point isn't just survival, it's that they stayed, they built, they remembered.
And that memory, genetically speaking, sits in the blood of millions today, according to the source. A living link to that deep past.
Okay, so that's the maternal thread. What about the paternal side? The Y chromosome story.
It complements it, really. It also speaks to endurance. This is where Haplogroup H becomes important.
Haplogroup H described as one of the oldest male lineages, right? The Indian marker.
That's a term sometimes used, yes. It's incredibly ancient and widespread within India. And the source contrasts it very deliberately with haplogroup R1A1.
R1A1 being the one often associated with Indo-European speakers, the Aryans, horses, northern languages, the ones who marched in, as the source puts it.
Exactly. R1A1 is framed as arriving later, moving in. Haplogroup H, on the other hand, stayed.
It didn't ride chariots, it didn't build empires. It survived. That's quite a statement.
It is, and it's still very common today, particularly the source notes, among groups historically termed lower castes, farmers, weavers, laborers, people tied to the land.
So this genetic line, H, is presented almost like a quiet rebellion against later historical narratives, something that remembers a time before those hierarchies really solidified.
In a sense, it points down into the soil, genetically remembering the hunter-gatherers and early farmers who were there long before, whose bloodline remained unshaken by those later arrivals. Endurance is the key theme.
Endurance, okay. So with this picture of deep, enduring Southern ancestry, where does that leave us with historical mysteries, like the Indus Valley civilization?
Ah, yes. The source definitely goes there. It asks this really provocative question. What the Indus people didn't actually vanish?
You mean they survived?
Survive, but maybe not in ruins, but in rhythm. Not in stone, but in blood. That's the idea explored.
And there are genetic clues pointing that way.
There are hints. The source mentions haplogroup L, another paternal line, associated more with builders, farmers, planners, rather than conquerors.
Yeah.
And crucially, a specific mix of DNA found in some Tamil groups.
The Iranian Neolithic farmer and South Indian hunter-gatherer mix?
Exactly. That combination is seen as a potential match for what you might expect in populations connected to the periphery of the Indus Valley.
Wow. And then there's the archaeology, Kizadi, miles away from the Indus.
Thousands of kilometers south, yes. But the excavations there are revealing things like urban layouts, kilns, sophisticated pottery, signs of a complex society.
And the script they found there.
That's the kicker, isn't it? Symbols that reportedly echo those from Harappa. The source emphasizes the similarity in form, spacing, rhythm, saying it's not coincidence, this is continuity.
Continuity. So could Tamil, or the whole Dravidian language family, be the living linguistic descendant of the Indus language?
That's the massive question it raises. Is Tamil not just ancient, it's ancestral? Could it be the closest living sound we have to that 4,500-year-old civilization?
It's mind-bending to think a modern language could hold that echo. And speaking of connections, the DNA also hints at movement across water, right? Trade.
Yes, there's a mention of a rare mtDNA subclade, something suggesting a connection that's distant, salt-swept, unmistakably oceanic.
Which fits with the historical picture, doesn't it? Roman coins found near Pupuhar, ancient Tamil ports trading globally.
Absolutely. Tamisakam, the ancient Tamil region, wasn't isolated. It was a port to the world, trading pepper, pearls, textiles for Roman wine, gold, glass, and ideas.
Whispers, the source calls them, and it stresses this was trade, interaction. Words that mixed in harbors, scripts that kissed each other across parchment, not conquest.
No, the source is clear. No empire claimed these shores through force back then. Tamil traders had cinnamon and language in the ocean, not necessarily armies dominating others.
And we see traces of Tamil route mentioned in Alexandria, Tamil coins in Petra, Tamil Brahmi inscriptions on pottery found near the Red Sea.
It paints a picture of sophisticated diplomacy and trade networks. This wasn't silence, this was diplomacy.
So while other empires were rising and falling, the Tamils were trading, writing, remembering.
And the genetics seem to reflect that stability. The source points out subtle inputs, yes, but nothing dramatic, no collapse, no overwrite, just contact, absorption, coexistence, and preservation of that deep core.
It makes you ask, like the source does, if words and DNA crossed the oceans, what else sailed in the belly of those ships? Ideas, stories.
I have to assume so. Culture travels with people and goods.
Okay, but this brings us to a really interesting puzzle the source raises, a paradox about time.
The age difference between the genes and the language.
Exactly. How can the blood carry this 40,000-year memory, but the language Tamil, Dravidian, is thought to be much younger, maybe 4,500 years old?
It's like finding that ancient box, but the letter inside seems much newer.
So how does that work?
Well, language just changes much faster than DNA. It morphs, dialects split off, languages can die out or be replaced entirely. DNA, though, it clings. It holds on to those deeper signals of migration, famine, ancient connections, even echoes of voices no one speaks anymore.
So the ancestors from 40,000 years ago, they might have spoken something completely different before Tamil was Tamil.
It's entirely possible, even likely. And we might even see ghostly traces of those older languages.
How? Where?
The source points to things linguists find puzzling, like Dravidian fingerprints in North Indian languages. Words or grammatical features in Marathi or even Sanskrit that seem out of place, that don't quite fit the Indo-Aryan pattern.
Like shadows of a lost language. Substrates, is that the term?
Substrates, exactly. A ghost language whispering from inside other tongues, as the source vividly puts it.
So maybe the Dravidian influence was once much wider, or perhaps older languages in the south evolved into Tamil.
Both are possibilities linguists grapple with. Did older words die, or were they reborn in new dialects?
It really makes you think about identity, doesn't it? If your genes are older than your grammar, then who were you before language knew how to name you?
What language did your genes speak? It's a profound question about layers of identity.
And identity, of course, brings us to the role of social structures. The source talks about caste and endogamy leaving a mark on the DNA, too.
Yes, the practice of endogamy, marrying strictly within your community for generations, has had a significant genetic impact.
In Tamil Nadu, the source describes it almost like code, a genetic firewall that sealed communities, preserving bloodlines incredibly tightly over centuries.
And the result, genetically, is clear. Studies show distinct clusters among different caste groups today, reflecting that long history of limited gene flow between them.
The source even mentions how some specific lineages, like certain upper caste male lines, might preserve not just the ancient markers, but also subtle signals from places like the Eurasian steppe or Iran, locked in by this social isolation, not necessarily by recent large migrations.
But there's a flip side to that coin, a price the source mentions. When you have these tightly sealed lineages folding in on themselves for so long,
problems can arise, genetic disorders.
Exactly. Something else begins to take root. Certain rare genetic diseases, Recessive conditions needing two copies of a gene variant can become unusually common within those specific groups. Brittle bones, blood disorders, skin conditions are mentioned as examples.
A double inheritance of risk, the source calls it.
Yes, it's also part of the molecular memory. The sealed bloodline carries everything, the history, the identity, the adaptations, but sometimes also vulnerabilities, the holy, the hidden, the hurt.
It forces some hard questions, doesn't it? What stories do these mutations carry? And in preserving identity, did we also preserve our weaknesses?
Difficult questions, but ones the genetic data itself seems to be raising.
So if we try to pull all these threads together, the deep ancestry, the Indus hints, the trade, the language paradox, the caste imprint, the source, offers a kind of summary metaphor, the genetic compass.
Right. If you imagine a genetic compass for South Asia, it argues it doesn't point north to where later migrations had the biggest impact. It points south to the Tamils.
Because of the Indian cline, that genetic gradient.
Exactly. You see this slope in ancestry proportions. High northern steppe ancestry in the north, decreasing as you go south. And in Tamil Nadu, the compass needle settles steady and still, reflecting that deep, less admixed, ancient South Indian ancestry.
And those genetic maps, the PCA plots, they show Tamil groups often at the far tip.
Often, yes. High in that indigenous South Indian component, low in the later steppe-related ancestry, relatively untouched by later empires of the blood, as the source dramatically puts it.
And the interpretation isn't isolation, but resistance.
Resistance against forgetting is how the source frames it. The lineage is endured, holding onto that ancient signature, becoming a kind of baseline, the code book from which the rest diverged.
Pointing to memory, to ancient tribes, to rituals maybe older than temples, lineages that just persisted.
And the personal connection is powerful. Your body carries coordinates. Your cells remember the journey, the settlement, the refusal to leave. For Tamils, that direction is deep, not a line. It's a route.
So, to synthesize the whole narrative from the source material, Tamil DNA tells a story not of conquest, but of continuity.
Continuity, absolutely. And its uniqueness isn't like being separate on an island, but more like a distinctness, like an intricate mosaic where all the pieces are old, carefully chosen, even the fractures preserved.
And the DNA whispers these older stories. Fire lit before temples, mothers teaching rituals before names, traders crossing oceans with poems and spices, not armies.
It transcends simple notions of race. It's about memory that outlives language, outlives empire, outlives even history itself.
The compass pointed south, the genes remembered. Even when borders and rulers changed, the blood did not forget.
And the power isn't in being untouched, but in having chosen what to keep. Carrying that 40,000-year legacy isn't just survival.
It's inheritance.
That's the word the source uses, inheritance.
Well, that was quite a journey through the genetic landscape of Tamil Nadu. We covered a lot from those ancient mothers and enduring fathers, the possible Indus echoes, the sea trade, that language puzzle, and the complex legacy of caste.
It really shows how genetics is adding such fascinating, sometimes challenging, new layers to how we understand the past and what shapes identity. It doesn't replace other fields, but it adds a whole new dimension.
Absolutely. And it leaves us, and you listening, with that really provocative question from the source material. If your DNA carried 40 millennia of memory, what would you do with it?
What would you choose to protect? What might you want to rewrite?
And what would you finally allow yourself to remember?
A question that resonates long after the data is analyzed.
Indeed. And the source material did hint at other potential deep dives. Something about forgotten matriarchs in South Asia. Silent empires.
Sounds fascinating. Maybe a story for another time.
We hope you'll join us for the next deep dive.